duty. In the instance of the story that I gave, because this facility was able to utilize TRICARE, they could serve active duty and they could serve those who were veterans as well. So I ask the chairman and ranking member for their support along with our members. I reserve.
Gentlelady reserves.
She reserved. Yeah.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I can proclaim the additional time.
The gentleman is recognized.
The amendment, I'm not exactly sure how it's targeted or how it would support the $125 million increase already in this bill. PTSD is a serious issue. It's becoming more serious as time goes on, as our men and women return from the battlefield. And so we understand the importance of the program, and we did increase by $125 million. And so this amendment, I think, is positive, and I'm not going to oppose it. And I would,
Mr. Visclosky.
Anyway, yield to Mr. Visclosky.
I appreciate the gentleman
yielding
and again would not be opposed to the gentlewoman's amendment, but would want to make the observation, given the observation I made in my opening comments, that I do wish she had chosen a different account for the offset, but again would not be opposed to the amendment. And I appreciate the chairman yielding very much.
PTSD is going to be with us for a long time because soldiers, men and women returning from the battlefield who believe they don't have PTSD or they don't want to admit to the fact that they have PTSD. And I can certainly understand why they do not want that on their record, but nevertheless, it is going to show up. And when it shows up, we need to be prepared to care for those who have fought this battle. And so I support the gentlelady's amendment, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman from Florida yields back his time. Gentlelady from Texas.
Well, I'm overwhelmed, and I'm very grateful to Chairman Young, my dear friend, who has done so much, as well as the ranking member, likewise, for his great service, and he's done so much. Let me just conclude by saying that PTSD, as both the chairman and the ranking member have agreed, is an invisible wound that you don't often see. And one of the best ways to increase access to treatment is to increase the medical facilities and also the medical reach and medical professionals. These additional dollars, as I understand the intent of both our ranking and chairman, will be effective and will be used effectively. Post-traumatic stress disorder is one of the most prevalent, devastating psychological wounds suffered by the brave men and women. And I ask my colleagues to support this amendment. I thank the chairman and I thank the ranking member. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Gentlelady yields back her time, and the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 10, printed in House Report 113-170. And for what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 10, printed in House Report Number 113-170, offered by Mr. Blumenauer of Oregon.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment that I'm introducing with my colleague, Ms. Gabbard from Hawaii, that would simply restore funding to the fiscal year 13 levels for cleanup and safety in public areas. We take great pride in the United States in our military being the best trained and most powerful fighting force in the world. But decades of military operations and training have left a toxic legacy of dangerous explosives and harmful chemicals on millions of acres in this country. The Department of Defense has an obligation to remediate these dangerous areas, often in public or residential areas, in a timely fashion. This contaminated real estate contains housing, schools, parks, playgrounds in every state and almost every congressional district in our country. To help the Department of Defense become a better partner for our communities and our constituents, I urge you to join me in supporting funding for a program that will employ skilled, high-tech companies to clean up these dangerous liabilities and create opportunities for economic development on land that is currently a danger. Just last month, at the height of the tourist season, Maryland officials were forced to shut down Assateague Island after a visitor noticed unexploded ordnance, a UXO, had washed ashore. Upon further investigation, they found hundreds of pieces of UXO that were discovered and had to be detonated on site. Our constituents demand that the United States lead by example. Keeping our families safe requires us to return the land to productive uses by paying for and cleaning up the mess we make. The Department of Defense agrees. Before the House Budget Committee last year, Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, when asked if there was a way to create a better partnership between local communities and the Department of Defense, said, "I'd be more than happy to engage in that process. The only way to ultimately achieve savings is to be able to have the cleanup and do it expeditiously. There are lots of things," he said, "I think we can do to improve the process." I appreciated Chairman Young's reply on the House floor last July when asked if the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee could commit to helping increase funding for environmental remediation on formerly used defense sites. And Chairman Young said, absolutely yes, I would very much like to do this. I believe we need to do it. I hope we have the opportunity to do it right this year. The funding levels would restore the DERP FUDS account to fiscal year 13 levels by redirecting $25.1 million from the General Combat Vehicle, a program whose utility has been called into question by the CBO, CRS. It would take a modest reduction in funding by less than 0.5%. But restoring funding to this program would still mean that funding for this vital cleanup would be less than 1/20% of the defense spending. At this rate, at the current rate, the estimate is that it will take 250 years to clean up these sites. I find this embarrassing, frankly, and I would hope that this would be the least we could do to keep faith with people who are at risk because the military has not cleaned up after itself, and it's Congress that needs to step up and provide the funding so the Department of Defense can do what it wants to do. And I would yield the balance of the time remaining, if I could inquire how much it is.
He has 2 minutes remaining.
I would be honored to yield the balance of the time to my co-author of this amendment, Congresswoman Gabbard.
The gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized for the balance of the time. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Due to its strategic location in the Pacific, my home of Hawaii has long been at the forefront of our nation's conflicts. We have more than 100 formerly used defense sites just as a result of a defensive buildup pre-World War I and later in the massive rush to mobilize in World War II. These sites that are often also referred to as FUDs can be littered with dangerous unexploded bombs and shells in addition to harmful chemicals. As in Hawaii, FUD sites across the country in every state and congressional district can serve as housing developments, schools, parks and playgrounds, areas that can be used productively in our communities. The Army Corps of Engineers has been working diligently to clean up this unexploded ordnance from many sites in Hawaii, many of which I visited myself, including a 135,000-acre Waikoloa maneuver area on the Big Island of Hawaii. During World War II, this area was home to some 50,000 U.S. service members who trained and prepared for many of the historic battles that were fought in the Pacific. One of the places that I visited and met with many elementary and middle school students was Waimea Middle School, where unexploded ordnance has been found within the last few years by these students themselves. You're talking about 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old students who have to be trained in this day and age to identify what an unexploded ordnance looks like and how to report it. This is not something that we should be facing in our society today. The effort to clean up these formerly used defense sites not only makes our communities safer, but it's made a significant and positive economic impact. There have been substantial investments in the training of local people in Hawaii to do this highly skilled and often dangerous work. And by training these local people, we're actually saving taxpayer dollars because we're not having to import talent, pay per diem and all of these other exorbitant costs, and we're providing jobs to the local community. I sponsor this amendment because Congress has a responsibility to ensure that the Department of Defense has the resources it needs to clean up these dangerous unexploded munitions. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
And the gentleman is recognized.
The amendment would add $25 million for this purpose of restoring these formerly used defense sites. But they cut the same amount from the Army RDT&E account, research and development. As important as this amendment might be, Army research and development is extremely important to the soldiers on the battlefield. In today's battlefield in Afghanistan, we're facing an enemy that is constantly moving. As we move one direction, they move another direction. As we present a new device, a new weapon, a new system, they develop a way to get around it. It's important that we continue to fund this Army research and development. The President requested $237.4 million for this purpose. We added an additional $25 million for the cleanup of these sites over the President's budget request. Now, the funding provided in the RDT&E Army accounts supports critical research in Army laboratories and in colleges and universities across our country to ensure that our soldiers have the best that we can provide them as they face an enemy that is constantly moving on the battlefield. Unnecessary reductions to the Army research and development is just not right, especially when we have already added the additional money to over and above the President's budget request. We understand the importance of restoring these sites, but we also understand the importance of maintaining our research and our development for the soldier on the battlefield to have the most advanced technology, the most advanced weapons that he or she can possibly have to carry out their mission and to protect themselves while they're doing it. And so I must oppose this amendment. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon. And those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Gentleman from Oregon.
On this, I would request the ayes and nays.
The gentleman requests a recorded vote. And pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 11, printed in House Report 113-170. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
I rise to withdraw Amendment Number 11.
No. The chair understands Amendment Number 11 will not be offered. And it is now in order to consider Amendment Number 12, printed in House Report 113-170. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
I rise to offer an amendment.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 12, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Pursuant to the House Resolution 312, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas.
I thank the Chairwoman, and I thank the chairman of the subcommittee, and I thank the ranking member of the subcommittee. Let me first of all acknowledge the hard work that it takes to provide for the men and women of the United States military and to secure America. As a member of the Homeland Security Committee, I am well aware of the combined efforts, obviously in the military and the line of demarcation between civilian, but we all are committed to the national security of this nation. This amendment deals with the reduction in funding of the procurement defense-wide by $1 million. I want to give the good news. Good news is that this money would be put in deficit reduction. But I do want to acknowledge that one of the issues that we must address as we go forward in the collective intelligence agencies, as we have listened to some of the challenges that we are facing in light of the present status of the leaks that have occurred by an American citizen who was working in the capacity as a contractor. This impacts all of us. And so as this $1 million would be submitted into the deficit reduction pool, I believe it is extremely important that we look very closely at the extended use of civilian contractors, the extended use of a budget that is responsible for intelligence of this country of 70%. Now, I know that some of the contractors deal with issues that are not individual personnel, but are dealing with research and dealing with equipment. But I believe that it is important that we look at the question that resulted in the disclosure of leaked and highly sensitive classified information and the continuing raising of concern of whether or not the national security of this nation has been impacted because of the outsourcing of intelligence responsibilities. In particular, I think we need to look at the outsourcing of determining top-secret clearance. Obviously, the circumstances that resulted in the leaking is an individual that had an interesting resume from the educational level of a high school GED, of which we respect and encourage people to complete their education, of the military service, and then on to top secret by a contractor who gave out top secret clearances. We hope that there was some kind of review. So my amendment is intended to highlight this issue, and I would hope that as we proceed, that this question will, if you will, have the ability to slow, not halt, the use of civilian contractors out of all of our agencies dealing with the issue of intelligence. We want to assure the American people that we are concerned about the protection of this nation's national security, civil liberties as well, but also to prevent the leaks that have occurred. I reserve.
Lady, reserve your time.
Let me conclude my remarks.
The lady from Texas is recognized.
Pardon me?
You're recognized.
Thank you. I'll conclude my remarks now. I will not reserve. Thank you. And let me just say that I hope this brings about a discussion that will cross jurisdictional lines of the Judiciary Committee, the Intelligence Committee, our appropriators. Let's fix this enormous use and reliance on these contractors outsourcing. Let's develop a highly trained group of federal governmental professionals committed, if you will, to the ongoing service to their nation. Respecting contractors have the same loyalty, but I think it would be better, Mr. Chairman, if we can frame the utilization of contractors in such a way that we can be assured that everything that deals with the national security of this nation will be protected. With that, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment.
The amendment is withdrawn. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 13, printed in House Report 113-170. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 13, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas.
Again, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank Mr. Young, Mr. Barkowski, for their leadership for an important responsibility in this nation. My amendment increases funding for the Defense Health Program's research and development by $10 million. These funds will address the question of breast cancer in the United States military. The American Cancer Society calls several strains of breast cancer as particularly aggressive subtype associated with lower survival rates. In this instance, it's a triple negative. But I raised an article that says fighting a different battle, breast cancer and the military. We all know, by the way, that breast cancer can affect both men and women. The bad news is breast cancer has been just about brutal on women in the military as combat. Let me say that sentence again. Breast cancer has been just about as brutal on women in the military as combat. More than 800 women have been wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan, according to the Army Times. 874 military women were diagnosed with breast cancer just between 2000 and 2011, and according to that same study, more are suspected. It grows. The good news is that we have been working on it, and I want to add my appreciation to the military. This, however, will allow for the additional research as new young women come into the United States military, as women stay longer in the United States military, as women get older in the United States military, as women ascend to leadership roles in the United States military. These dollars will provide an additional research. Not only is breast cancer striking relatively young military women at alarming rates, but male service members, veterans, and their dependents are at risk as well. With their younger and generally healthier population, those in the military tend to have a lower risk for most cancers than civilians, including significantly lower colorectal, lung, and cervical. But breast cancer is a different story. That's why my amendment. Military people in general, and in some cases very specifically, are at a significantly greater risk for contracting breast cancer, says Dr. Richard Clapp, a top cancer expert at Boston University who works at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on military breast cancer issues, says life in the military can mean exposure to a witch's brew of risk factors directly linked to greater chances of getting breast cancer. And so, my friends, I am asking that we do the right thing. We're on the right track. We're on the right trail. We're on the right road. But with the expansion of women in the military, I can assure you, for long life, a vital service that these men and women give, it is extremely important to move forward with this amendment. Researchers point to a high use of oral contraception that's linked to breast cancer among women that would ensure that this particular amendment would be a positive step forward. So I ask my colleagues to support the Jackson Lee amendment. With that, I reserve my time.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate the recognition, and I think I speak for the subcommittee when I would suggest that we would be delighted to accept the gentlewoman's amendment, and I would yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
Let me thank the gentlemen and thank them for their commitment to the men and women of the United States military, and let me thank my colleagues for accepting this amendment. With that, I know that we will be safer, secure, and healthier with this fight against breast cancer that continues to grow in the United States military. I ask my colleagues to support it. With that, I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Resolution 312, I offer amendments en bloc.
The clerk will designate the amendments en bloc.
En bloc amendments number 2, consisting of amendments numbered 83, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, and 96, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. Young of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Young, and the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Veslowski, will each control 10 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to yield I would be happy to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Chairman Young and also Ranking Member Veslosky for providing me the time to speak today. Mr. Speaker, providing STEM education to America's youth is critical to the global competitiveness of our nation. This will rely, however, on a solid pipeline of STEM degree graduates. I stand here today to offer my revenue-neutral, star-based amendment number 99 to House Resolution 2397, the Department of Defense Appropriations, to increase funding to the star-based youth program by $5 million. Starbase is currently active in 79 congressional districts throughout the country and engages local fifth grade elementary schools by exposing them to STEM subjects through an inquiry-based curriculum. The program is carried out by the military services because the Department of Defense has identified a shortage of young adults graduating from these difficult and hard sciences. The Starbase Academies work with school districts to engage students through hands-on, mind-on, experiential activities. They study engineering, nanotechnology, navigation, and mapping. These are all critical fields that will keep our country competitive. My no-cost, revenue-neutral amendment makes a significant step towards providing and engaging America's youth with the tools they need to pursue careers in STEM, field where jobs are available and there's a significant lack of trained workers. Recent Brookings Institute said that as of 2011, there are now 26 million U.S. jobs, or approximately 20% of all jobs in the country, that require a high level of knowledge in any one of the STEM fields. I urge my colleagues to support this revenue-neutral amendment to H.R. 2396. Our students and our workforce need this. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Indiana.
I will yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Question is on the amendments offered en bloc by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The en bloc amendments have been agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 14, printed in House Report 113-170. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 14, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. Polis of Colorado.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As members of Congress, one of our greatest responsibilities is to keep our country safe and invest our resources wisely, especially when it comes to securing the safety of our country. The Ground-Based Mid-Course Defense, GMD program, is a missile system that is supposed to be designed to deflect missiles from rogue states like Iran and North Korea. That would be great if it worked. It's a system with a long history of failure, and military leaders have expressed doubts for years about the viability of this program. I encourage my colleagues to support my amendment, which would return the funding level for the GMD program back to the Pentagon's own request level in the fiscal year 2014 Defense Appropriations Bill. Specifically, my amendment cuts funding for the GMD missiles by $107 million and applies those savings to deficit reduction. Lacking a single successful test intercept since December 2008, the GMD program is simply a failure so far. These repeated failures, unfortunately, have not stopped us from continuing to authorize over $1 billion for the GMD program to purchase 14 additional missiles on top of the 30 we already have in the NDAA Act of 2013. The Government Accountability Office has noted that the testing of the system to date has been insufficient to verify that it will function as intended. And there was a most recent test failure on July 5th, which supports that assessment from the GAO. Americans want a missile defense system we can count on. We need to ensure that our missile defenses are tested and are actually capable of keeping our families safe and don't merely provide the illusion of safety. Before we continue to build an arsenal, we should make sure that it works as custodians of taxpayer funds. Now, of course, those on the other side will argue that we need to make sure that in an ever more dangerous world, we need to have and invest in missile defenses to protect against the threats from Iran and North Korea. And of course, I agree. The issue is whether this works or not, and whether we should reward failure as a Congress and as a country, or whether we should invest in success. I believe, Mr. Chairman, we should invest in success and not reward failure. We need to be candid about the challenges we face. Deterring threats and encouraging diplomacy is crucial to keeping America safe, and our national security, the safety of Americans, is too important to rely on programs that have failed test after test when we need to have confidence that when we need them, they will work. If we're serious about cutting wasteful spending here in Congress, we need to be willing to take a close look at programs like the GMD and find ways to trim spending and increase our national security. We can do this by building a leaner, more agile, more affordable military that's suited to the 21st century while being diligent in ensuring that our existing systems can keep us safe and operate as they're intended to. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. What purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask for time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you know, I'm reminded that when 2 airplanes hit 2 buildings, it cost our economy $2 trillion and many thousands of lives. And it occurs to me that sometimes we are fairly short-sighted, sometimes even as conservative fiscally as I am, that sometimes in this chamber we don't look to our primary duty and we become penny-wise and very pound-foolish. One nuclear-armed missile coming into the United States could ruin our whole day. And I am astonished sometimes at the lack of insight to this very real problem. The system that we're speaking of today, the GMD, is the only system that we have tested that is successfully capable of defending this country against intercontinental ballistic missiles carrying nuclear warheads or other ordnance. And Mr. Chairman, I just find it astonishing that President Obama and his supporters have cut funding for our missile defenses every year they've been in office. And now they criticize these programs when there are test failures or delays that have been made worse by their slashing and burning of the program. Mr. Chairman, I am just convinced that the cost of failing in this area is simply too high. While the ground-based mid-course defense system did miss its target on a July 5th test, it was one test, and it has been successfully tested repeatedly since the 1999 testing began. But this administration has not offered funding for testing this system since 2008. And Mr. Chairman, it should not shock us that when we don't test our systems, sometimes they don't always perform perfectly. And if we cut funding for systems that don't have a perfect test record, we are doomed to have no protection at all. Every sophisticated program in the Defense Department has had technical challenges at some time. But GMD's technical challenges are not insurmountable, and we must commit to support these systems to see these challenges through. The amendment that Mr. Polis has offered would strike $107 million authorized in the National Defense Authorization Act, and it would actually, because the authority for multi-year procurement would then be done away with, this Polis amendment actually costs the taxpayers money. And I would just ask the gentleman, if not this system, what other system would he suggest that we should protect our country against in a potential situation where an intercontinental ballistic missile were coming into the homeland? And I would ask him to consider that, and I would now yield 2 minutes to my friend from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn.
Recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to the amendment by the gentleman from Colorado. Mr. Chairman, the House has rejected these amendments, this and a following amendment from the gentleman from Colorado on the National Defense Authorization Act already this year. This amendment would strike the funding provided in this bill to provide for multi-year procurement authority of booster motors for the ground-based interceptors, GBIs, that Secretary Hagel announced the United States would deploy this past March. This amendment, if it were adopted, and perhaps this is unintentional, but it would actually cost the United States as much as $200 million. Now, perhaps the gentleman is opposed to the Obama administration's missile defense policy as articulated by Secretary of Defense Hagel. If so, that's a separate issue. But when you look at North Korea, you look at Iran, I think it would be unwise to oppose the decision to add ground-based interceptors. All that this amendment is doing is raising the price that taxpayers have to pay for the GBIs that the President and the Secretary of Defense have said that we should buy. This isn't just my position. It's what the Missile Defense Agency and the CBO have already said. Multi-year procurement will save the taxpayer money. Now, the reliability issues that the gentleman brought up have nothing to do with this funding, because this funding talks about booster motors. Of the 26 tests that involved the GMD system, ground-based missile defense, 18 of those were 100% successful. Of the remaining 8 that had problems, none of them involved the booster motor, and that's the subject of this amendment. So this amendment is misdirected if it's concerned about the stated concern of reliability. I can't understand why we would oppose multi-year procurement and advanced procurement of the 14 GBIs that the Defense Department says we will buy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would urge opposition to this amendment, and I yield back to the gentleman from Arizona.
The gentleman from Arizona has 15 seconds.
Mr. Chairman, I just remind the people in this chamber that nuclear missiles coming to this country are the most dangerous weapons that we face, and GMD is the only system that we have to protect ourselves from it. And I hope that this amendment will be defeated, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Colorado.
To be clear, Mr. Chairman, this amendment saves taxpayer money, actually reduces the deficit by over $100 million. I'll be happy to yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Indiana.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding, and I rise in strong support of the amendment and would want to make a couple of things clear to all of my colleagues. The fact is, the administration did ask for money for the ballistic missile defense mid-course section in the bill. They asked for $1,033 million this year, fiscal year 2014. This is not absent an administration request. Secondly, the gentleman from Arizona said that the bad test and the problems that they indicate are not unresolvable. I would absolutely agree with the gentleman. But this is a procurement account. Let us resolve these problems before we procure something that last month has not worked, so we don't have to pull them out of silos, we don't have to invest additional taxpayers' money, and we don't have to waste that hard-earned money. There are threats, and we ought to make sure the systems we deploy to protect our nation work before we procure and deploy them. I applaud the gentleman for his amendment and strongly support it.
Colorado.
I thank the gentleman. It's just simple business sense. It doesn't save money to pre-order something that you don't know works. You don't do that in business. We as a country shouldn't do it. This is not a theoretical discussion about advanced purchasing or economies of scale. When things work, there's a legitimate discussion about that. It is absolutely foolish to throw good taxpayer money after bad before a system is proven to work to keep America safe. I urge my colleagues to adopt this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The question is, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Would like to request a roll call on that last amendment.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, the further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado will be postponed. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 15, printed in House Report 113-170. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 15, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. Blumenauer of Oregon.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
This amendment simply reduces research and development, test and evaluation funds for the new Ohio-class nuclear-armed submarine by 10%. Bear in mind, we're facing 10% sequestration cuts over the next decade. This will help the Navy plan for the likely effects of sequestration by cutting Cold War weapons rather than what the military really needs. These replacement submarines are unaffordable and will weaken the surface Navy. They're expected to cost $6 billion per boat on average, with a plan to procure 12 of them. According to the report from the Arms Control Association, the operating costs of this replacement will be $347 billion lifetime. Now, even the Navy's own shipbuilding plan for fiscal year 2014 said replacing the Ohio-class submarines will have a disproportionate impact on Navy shipbuilding plans. It comes at the expense of other shipbuilding abilities and naval readiness. There are far more effective job creation plans than to undertake this initiative. Our amendment offers a more balanced approach. We can easily afford to phase down or slow the replacement submarine program. The Navy can deploy the 1,000 nuclear warheads on the submarines planned under the New START Treaty with 8 Ohio-class submarines, which means this program can be, this modest cut can be easily handled. The Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff have determined that the United States can provide for its security with fewer nuclear weapons. Yet nuclear acquisition programs are racing to preserve the current size of today's nuclear force. Instead of wasting billions of dollars on weapons the Pentagon says it will not need, we should realign our budgets with the reality that the United States plans to reduce its nuclear arsenal. And I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would remind my colleagues that we've already cut the defense budget pretty drastically, and nuclear weapons exist in today's world. I might not like it. You might not like it. We might wish they didn't exist, but they do exist. And because nuclear weapons exist in this world, we need to have the ability to defend against them and also deter their use. That's important to our national security. Now, we do that through what we call the nuclear triad. We have the capability to launch nuclear missiles from silos that are based on land. We have the ability to launch nuclear-capable missiles from airplanes. We also have the ability to launch nuclear-capable missiles from submarines that are somewhere in these vast oceans. And of those three of the triad, the nuclear submarine, or the submarine with nuclear capability, is the most survivable. Because you can blow up a silo, you can shoot down an airplane, but it's almost impossible to find a submarine somewhere in the ocean that has this nuclear capability. And because it's the most survivable, then it is the best deterrent, because we know what it can do and our enemies know what it can do. And right now we are planning to replace what's called the Ohio-class submarines to continue this capability. This is a capability that's kept us safe for the last 60 years. It's still important to our long-term national security, and if we adopt this amendment, we will begin to cripple this capability, and that's bad for our national security. So I would urge my colleagues to vote against this amendment. Now I'd like to yield a minute and a half to Mr. Courtney.
The gentleman is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise also in opposition to this amendment. Again, I'd like to just sort of add a few points to the gentleman's prior comments, which is that, first of all, the fleet is not being replaced one-to-one. The current fleet size is 14. The new fleet will be 12. The program has already been delayed 2 years because of earlier reductions in the defense budget. That 2-year delay is going to push us right up to 2021, which is when the aging fleet that's in play right now is going to start being decommissioned in terms of the reduction over time. And lastly, I would just like to say, because of the investment in design and development, which is what this amendment is focused on, we have saved $2 billion per vessel from where the Navy started when this project was first commenced a number of years ago. It was $7 billion. We're down to $5 per boat in terms of the projected costs that the Navy has actually come forward with. And I would just lastly note that the strategic review, which has been done under Secretary Gates, under Secretary Hagel, has repeatedly put SSBN replacement at the absolute apex in terms of national defense priorities, again, for a lot of the reasons which the prior speaker indicated. Sea-based nuclear deterrence fits in perfectly well with the START treaty, but the math of 8 subs for 1,000 warheads, if you're going to have sailors being back home after deployment, if you're going to have repairs and maintenance, you need 12 as a bare minimum. A far cry from the Cold War days when 41 for freedom was actually the size of this fleet. We are now down to the bare bones. We should not cut it any further, and I would oppose the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield a minute and a half to Mr. Walsh. From the state of Washington, I'd like to yield a minute and a half to Mr. Kilmer.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise not only as the representative of the area that includes Naval Base Kitsap, which is the home port of 8 SSBNs and 60% of the Navy's SSBN force, but with a non-parochial interest as well. I rise in opposition to this amendment because we know the SSBNs, or the Ohio-class subs, have been a pillar of our national defense for over 3 decades. These subs and their crews act as peacekeepers around the world every single day. They are among our most strategic and significant assets for a continued forward presence and a strategic deterrent around the world. Our country, our Navy, and our sailors cannot afford to delay the recapitalization of this platform. And while I thank the good gentleman from Oregon for bringing this forward, I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida.
Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
We have
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Thank you. I listened to my good friend from Florida, and I agree in terms of the necessity of having a strong nuclear deterrent, but he just ticked off. We will still have the air-based bombers. We will have land-based missiles, and we would have, even with 8 nuclear submarines, we would have more than enough capacity. Now, the historic arguments, I think, are a little bit distorted. Each of these new submarines carry 16 to 20 missiles. Each missile today carries 4 to 5 nuclear warheads, each 20 times more powerful than the bombs that decimated Hiroshima. One of these submarines, 2, 3, 4, adequate to serve as a deterrent for anybody going forward, especially when we have our air and land base in addition to this. We have a deterrent that will make a difference to anybody. We don't have to, as we're moving now to scale down the overall number of warheads, because, you know, who is it that we're deterring? North Korea, which doesn't yet have a missile that can even get to us, a fraction of the firepower would destroy it. We could wreck China. We could decimate the Soviet Union. Deterrence is alive and well with a fraction of this. But embarking on a program to spend hundreds of billions of dollars, freezing us in time with, as I mentioned, $347 billion going forward, is foolish. Every independent analysis suggests that we will be better off going forward with being able to right-size the nuclear deterrent. Even the 1,000 is probably more than we need today. If we can't come to grips with the fact that we are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on things that don't make us any safer, that we can't afford, and come at the expense of operational activities for our military that does matter, we're going to be trapped in this downward budget spiral, wasting tax dollars, not making America safer, not making it stronger, and not being able to have resources for things that would be higher priority for our military. Now, notwithstanding all the hyperbole here, this is a modest 10% reduction in the development resources. It's not going to stop us going forward, but it will be a signal to maybe let's take a deep breath, look at how we do this most effectively, and I would strongly urge approval of this amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment. Gentleman from Oregon.
Mr. Chairman, I would request the yeas and nays.
Does the gentleman request a recorded
vote? Yes.
Pursuant to Clause 6, Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon will be postponed. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 16, printed in House Report 113-170. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 16, printed in House Report Number 113-170, offered by Mr. Pocan of Wisconsin.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Pocan, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to introduce an amendment to the Defense Appropriations Bill, and I want to thank Chairman Young and Ranking Member Veslosky for your efforts on this important legislation. My amendment would help improve the safety of advanced batteries that are critical to both our new energy economy as well as our current and future Department of Defense missions. Advanced energy technologies not only produce good-paying, high-quality American jobs, but they also reduce our dependence on foreign oil, protect the environment, and lead to advancements of new energy-efficient sources that are more effective. Thus, it's no surprise that our military requires this type of innovative technologies to meet its expanding needs. Longer-lasting energy sources mean our military's transportation and weapon systems are more effective in the field and limit safety risks that arise from refueling or recharging. More efficient energy capabilities mean a more efficient, more effective, and safer military. On that front, lithium-ion batteries represent some of the most significant clean energy advancements of recent history. They contain no toxic chemicals. They have up to 3 times the performance capabilities of other battery products and are required for many of the military's next-generation weapon systems. Their need will only increase. But as often is the case with new technologies, improvements need to be made to ensure their safe and effective use. Current lithium-ion batteries can cause violent fires with extreme smoke and high temperatures that are potentially catastrophic, especially on ships. As a result of these safety concerns, acceptance and adoption of many lithium-ion powered Navy systems under development are greatly delayed, greatly limiting our abilities to respond to emerging threats. None of us here want to have any members of our military in danger, but we don't have to choose between improving our operational capabilities and keeping our courageous service members safe. We are not far away from these types of advancements. New research has produced high-temperature material compounds that can significantly extend at maximum temperatures at which the batteries can safely operate. We need to continue to develop and test these innovative compounds that require further research and development support. That is why I introduced this budget-neutral amendment, which I'm proud to introduce with Congressman Cardenas, to provide for the necessary funding for research, development, and testing to improve the safety of advanced batteries. And now I'd like to speak more on the amendment. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my friend from California, Congressman Cardenas.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise today in support of Congressman Pocan's amendment increasing the Navy Research, Testing, Development, and Evaluation account by $10 million. This would support research improving the safety of advanced batteries, specifically lithium-ion batteries. This amendment does not add new funding to the bill. Mr. Chairman, lithium-ion is the present and future of our energy storage technology. This technology is critical to U.S. military personnel for communications, navigation, and vehicles in land, sea, air, and space. It is also important to many other sectors of the economy, including the utility companies, transportation, aviation, aerospace, and medical devices. As we have seen with recent airliner incidents, we can do more to address the safety of these batteries. Without improving that safety, we cannot fully realize the potential of lithium-ion technology. Without realizing that potential, we cannot improve our production capability here in the United States of America. The global market for lithium batteries was worth more than $11 billion in 2012 and is expected to double to $22 billion by 2016. Right now, the U.S. has very small market share of the lithium-ion industry. The bulk of the industry is in Japan, China, and Korea. Investments like this are critical to growing the U.S. industrial base and creating middle-class manufacturing jobs. Funding research and development for this cutting-edge technology can ensure that the lithium-ion industry grows right here in America. With that growth comes more government and commercial applications. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. As an electrical engineer myself, I'm very, very proud of the innovation of the United States of America. But little by little, we see that slipping away to other countries. Yet at the same time, if we just invest a little, this $10 million will yield billions of dollars in the future. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, would request a time, please. Claim the time.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate that. I certainly appreciate what my colleague from Wisconsin is trying to do with his amendment. As former chairman and ranking member on the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, has certainly attached great importance to battery research. Mr. Frelinghuysen is on the floor as well. He chairs Energy and Water. The concern I do have is to make sure that we are organized as a federal government on this research and that, again, we're looking at the appropriate expenditure in the appropriate places for the funds. One example I simply would give is that in this year's fiscal year 2014 Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, $24 million was provided to the Joint Center for Energy Storage Research, a DOE Energy Innovative Hub. This hub, whose team includes 5 of the national laboratories and several major research universities, is seeking new technologies to move in the direction that my colleague supports. So again, do appreciate his long-term goal. Obviously, we have to reduce our dependency on carbon fossil fuel from a national security perspective. But again, want to make sure that we're cautious as far as where and how much of this money we can effectively spend in the coming fiscal year, and would yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back.
I would reserve my time and recognize the gentleman from New Jersey.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Happy to claim time in opposition. Is there some movement to withdraw this? Did we hear?
Yeah, if I can, if I understand correctly, the chairman and the ranking member have also said we can continue to have this conversation. With recognition of that, I'd be glad at this time to withdraw my amendment.
Happy to look forward to working with you.
Okay,
thank you very much.
I would yield back my time.
The amendment is withdrawn. It's now in order to consider amendment number 17, printed in House Report 113-170. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 17, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. Nugent of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nugent, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not every day I get to stand up here in front of the House and talk about a government program that is actually doing well and running ahead of schedule. But that's what brings me here today. The Counter-Electronics High-Power Microwave Missile Project, or CHAMP for short, is an Air Force program to develop a capability to disrupt or eliminate an adversary's electronics without causing physical destruction to people or facilities. The only real question with CHAMP is what vehicle used to deliver that microwave to the intended target. As it turns out, we have an available stockpile of cruise missiles, which are expensive to build, which have no other use. Fitting CHAMP into our existing cruise missiles is far cheaper than trying to construct a new vehicle just for that purpose. My amendment, which is fully offset, would provide $10.5 million toward that end. By making this investment now, we can ensure that CHAMP will be able to put this weapon in the field years ahead of schedule and at a lower cost, while also continuing to develop a longer-term solution. It's a shame that fixing every government program isn't as simple as this. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from